There are moments in life when silence becomes a choice, and Raffaella Moretto had chosen it every single day for the past 3 years. But on a sweltering afternoon in Palermo, with the Mediterranean sun bleeding gold across ancient cobblestones, that choice would shatter like glass under a hammer, and the sound would echo through the underworld of Sicily in ways no one, least of all her, could have predicted. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do isn't to raise your voice, it's to finally use it. The Café del Sirene sat wedged between a bakery that smelled of anise and a flower stall bursting with blood-red roses, a humble refuge in Palermo's old quarter, where tourists took photographs and locals took refuge from the heat. The cafe was unremarkable in every way except one. It knew how to keep secrets. Every city has places like this, establishments that exist in the margins, where the powerful and the powerless share the same air, but never the same oxygen. Raffaella had been working there for exactly 32 days, and in that time, she had perfected the art of being invisible. She moved between tables like a whisper, her dark hair always pulled back, her eyes always down, her smile always measured. Polite, professional, forgettable. That was the goal. That had always been the goal. She hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Raffaella Moretto commanded lecture halls at the University of Bologna, when her voice carried across auditoriums filled with students hungry for her insights on linguistics and cultural identity, when her name appeared in academic journals and her opinions mattered. But that woman, that professor, that scholar, that version of herself who believed in the power of truth, had died 3 years ago in a courthouse hallway when she realized that some truths cost more than others. The woman who served espresso and cleared plates at the Café del Sirene was someone else entirely. Someone smaller, someone safer. Someone who had learned that survival meant making yourself so insignificant that even your shadow disappeared. The cafe owner, Signor Bianchi, was a nervous man with kind eyes and trembling hands, the kind of person who had spent his entire life reading the room before entering it. He treated Raffaella well, paid her in cash, and asked no questions about her past. In return, she asked nothing about the men who sometimes came through his door, trailing violence like cologne. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Some customers were not customers at all. They were weather patterns. You didn't challenge them, you simply waited for them to pass. On this particular afternoon, the cafe was half full with the usual mix. A German couple studying a map, 3 elderly women playing cards in the corner, a young man typing furiously on a laptop, his espresso long cold. The ceiling fans turned lazy circles overhead, pushing hot air from one side of the room to the other. Accomplishing nothing, Raffaella was refilling the sugar dispensers when she felt it. That subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that happens when danger walks through a door. The conversations didn't stop immediately. They died in stages, like dominoes falling in slow motion. First, the young man's typing ceased, then the German couple's laughter faded. Then even the elderly women's cards stopped slapping against the table. By the time Raffaella looked up, the silence was complete. Luciano Ferranti stood in the doorway, like a man who had never questioned his right to occupy space. He was 43 years old, though he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had stopped counting years and started counting territories. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his frame. In his shoes, handmade, certainly Italian, probably worth more than Raffaella's monthly rent, clicked against the tile floor with the rhythm of a metronome behind him. His entourage fanned out with practiced efficiency. 4 men, all wearing variations of the same expression. That peculiar blend of boredom and readiness that comes from being paid to hurt people. Everyone in Palermo knew Luciano Ferranti. He controlled half the port district, owned pieces of legitimate businesses and all of the illegitimate ones, and had built an empire on the simple principle that fear was more reliable than loyalty. He wasn't the most violent boss in Sicily's underworld. That distinction belonged to others. But he was perhaps the most calculating. And calculation, Raffaella knew, was far more dangerous than Raj. Signor Bianchi materialized from behind the counter, his face arranged in an expression of welcome that didn't quite reach his eyes. Signor Ferranti, your usual table. Of course, of course. His voice had that particular pitch of forced cheerfulness that made Raffaella's stomach tighten. She had heard the tone before, in another life, from another man who had tried to smile while his world collapsed around him. Luciano didn't acknowledge Bianchi. He simply walked to the corner booth, the one with the best view of both the entrance and the street, and settled into it with the ease of a king claiming a throne. His men dispersed to surrounding tables, creating a buffer zone, a kingdom within a kingdom. The cafe's other patrons suddenly discovered urgent reasons to study their phones, their maps, their coffee cups, anything but the corner booth. Raffaella felt Bianchi's eyes on her before he spoke. "Raffaella, please, table 7. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him that she had cleaned enough tables, that surely someone else could take this one, that her shift was almost over anyway. But she had learned long ago that the word no was a luxury she could no longer afford. So she picked up her notepad, smoothed her apron, and walked toward the corner booth with the same measured steps she used for every table. As if this were just another order, just another customer, just another moment in a long series of unremarkable moments. Except her hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough that she had to grip the notepad tighter to hide it. As she approached, she could hear fragments of their conversation, something about a shipment, a delay, someone who needed to be reminded of their obligations. The words were coded, but the meaning was clear enough. When she reached the table, she kept her eyes on her notepad and her voice steady. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. What can I bring you?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and in that moment, Raffaella felt the weight of Luciano's gaze. It was the kind of look that cataloged and dismissed simultaneously. The way you might glance at a piece of furniture to confirm it was still there, but held no particular interest. Then he smiled, and somehow that was worse than the silence. "Ah, a new girl," he said, and his voice carried across the cafe with theatrical projection, as if he were performing for an audience, which Raffaella realized he was. "Tell me, Cara, how long have you been working here?" She kept her expression neutral. "1 month, signore." He leaned back in his seat, his smile widening. 1 month, and in this 1 month, have you learned to speak properly, or do you only know the basics? "Hello? Coffee? Tip, please." He delivered the last phrases in an exaggerated, mocking imitation of broken Italian, the kind tourists used when they pointed at menus and spoke too loudly, as if volume could compensate for incompetence. His men laughed on cue, a chorus of hyenas. Raffaella felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her face still. "I speak well enough to take your order, signore." Luciano exchanged glances with his men, his eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "She speaks well enough. Did you hear that, Tommaso? She speaks well enough." More laughter. He turned back to Raffaella, and now his voice took on that particular cadence, that exaggerated lilt that was meant to sound like Italian, but was really just cruelty dressed in phonetics. Okay, let me make it easy for you, yes? We want, how do you say, cappuccino? He drew out each syllable like he was teaching a child. Can you remember that? Cappuccino? Or should I write it down for you? The cafe had gone completely silent now. Even the ceiling fans seemed to have stopped. Raffaella could feel every eye on her, could sense the collective held breath of people who knew they were witnessing something but weren't sure yet what it was. Humiliation, certainly. Entertainment for a bored predator. But there was something else in the air too. Something that tasted like electricity before a storm. She wrote down their orders, 4 cappuccinos, 2 espressos, a macchiato, her pen moving across the paper with deliberate precision. When she finished, she looked up, and for just a fraction of a second, she let herself meet Luciano's eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held no malice. That was a strange thing. There was no anger there, no real cruelty, just amusement. Just the casual entertainment of a man who had so much power that other people's dignity had become a toy he could pick up and discard at will. And in that moment, something inside Raffaella, something she had buried deep, something she had promised herself she would never let surface again, began to crack. She nodded once, said nothing, and walked back toward the counter. Behind her, she could hear them still laughing, could hear Luciano saying something about, "These girls, they come from villages. They barely know how to read, could hear the agreement, the casual dismissal, the easy assumption that she was exactly what she appeared to be. Nobody, nothing, invisible. In the kitchen, she set the order slip on the counter for Marco, the barista, who looked at her with sympathy and something else. Relief, maybe, that it was her and not him. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. She was too busy listening to the sound of her own heartbeat, too busy feeling the weight of 3 years of silence pressing down on her chest like a stone. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of making herself small. 3 years of swallowing words that wanted to be spoken, of biting her tongue until it bled, of choosing survival over dignity, because dignity, she had learned, was a luxury that could get you killed. But standing there in that kitchen, with the espresso machine hissing and the smell of coffee grounds thick in the air, Rafaela Moretto made a decision. It wasn't a rational decision. It wasn't a safe decision. It was the kind of decision that people make when they realize that some deaths are slower than others, and that living in silence might be the slowest death of all. She had spent 3 years being invisible, 3 years being nobody. And in that moment, watching Marco prepare the drinks, watching the foam swirl in the cappuccino cups, she decided that she was tired. So tired of being small, tired of being dismissed, tired of men like Luciano Ferranti, who believed that power gave them the right to make other people feel worthless. She had been a professor once. She had commanded rooms. She had changed minds. She had mattered. And maybe, just for a moment, she could matter again. When the drinks were ready, she arranged them on a silver tray with the same care she always used, making sure each cup sat perfectly centered on its saucer, each spoon aligned just so her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. She picked up the tray and walked back through the cafe, past the German couple who were pretending to study their map, past the elderly women who had abandoned their card game to watch, past the young man whose laptop screen had gone dark. She walked toward the corner booth where Luciano Ferranti sat like a king in his castle, surrounded by his court, still chuckling about something one of his men had said. She reached the table and began setting down the drinks, placing each one in front of its intended recipient with practiced efficiency. Cappuccino, espresso, macchiato. When she placed the final cappuccino in front of Luciano, he glanced up at her with that same amused expression, ready to deliver another joke, another jab, another casual cruelty. But before he could speak, Rafaela did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She opened her mouth and let her real voice out. "Mi scusi, signor Ferranti," she said, and her Italian was perfect. Not the careful, measured Italian of someone who had learned it in school, but the fluid, nuanced Italian of someone who had studied its rhythms and structures, who understood its regional variations, who could hear the difference between Sicilian and Calabrian dialects in the space between syllables. "I couldn't help but notice your earlier performance. The exaggerated pronunciation, the theatrical mockery. It was quite entertaining, truly, but I feel compelled to offer a small correction, if you'll permit me." The table went still. Luciano's smile froze on his face, not quite fading, but not quite holding either, suspended in that uncertain space between amusement and confusion. Rafaela continued, her voice calm, measured, carrying across the cafe with the same projection he had used, except hers wasn't a performance. It was precision. You see, when you mock someone's language, when you reduce their words to caricature, you're not actually mocking their inability to speak. You're revealing your own inability to listen. Dialects, accents, the way people shape vowels and consonants. These aren't deficiencies. They're histories. They're the sound of where someone comes from, who raised them, what they've survived. Every time you open your mouth, Signor Ferranti, you tell a story about yourself. And just now the story you told was this, that you believe power gives you the right to make other people feel small. But here's what you don't understand. Respect isn't something you can take. It's not territory you can claim or a business you can control. Respect is earned through how you treat people when you have absolutely nothing to gain from treating them well. And by that measure, signore, you are bankrupt. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but transforms it. that changes the molecular structure of the air itself. Rafaela could hear her own breathing, could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, could hear the espresso machine's low hum from the kitchen. But from the corner booth, from Luciano Ferranti and his 4 men, there was nothing. No laughter now, no jokes, just stunned, complete silence. She met his eyes again, and this time she didn't look away. This time she let him see exactly who she was. Not a waitress, not a nobody, not someone who could be dismissed with a joke and a sneer. Someone who had found her voice again, even if it cost her everything. "Your cappuccino is getting cold," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked back toward the counter, her steps measured, her head high. The empty tray balanced perfectly in her hands. Behind her, she could feel the weight of every eye in the cafe, could sense the shift in the room's energy, could almost hear the collective intake of breath from people who couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. She didn't look back. She simply walked to the counter, set down the tray, and waited. For what? She wasn't entirely sure. Retaliation, maybe. Violence. The kind of response that men like Luciano Ferranti were famous for when their authority was challenged. But seconds passed and nothing happened. She risked a glance toward the corner booth and saw something she hadn't expected. Luciano was staring at her, but the amusement was gone from his face. In its place was something else entirely. Surprise, yes, but also something that looked almost like respect? No, that wasn't quite right. It was more complicated than that. It was the expression of someone who had just discovered that the world contained something unexpected, something that didn't fit into the neat categories he had constructed. He picked up his cappuccino, took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact with her. Then he set the cup down, leaned back in his seat, and did something that made Rafaela's blood run cold. He smiled. Not the theatrical smile from before. This was different. This was genuine. This was the smile of a man who had just found something interesting. "Brava," he said quietly, and the word carried across the cafe like a benediction or a curse. Rafaela couldn't tell which. Then he stood, his men scrambling to follow, and walked toward the door. As he passed the counter, he paused, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a money clip thick with bills. He peeled off several, far more than the drinks cost, and placed them on the counter. "For the excellent service," he said, his voice low enough that only she and Bianchi could hear. "And an even better education." He held her gaze for one more moment, and in that moment, Rafaela saw something that terrified her more than anger ever could. Interest. Then he was gone, his men trailing behind him, the door swinging shut with a soft chime. The cafe remained frozen for exactly 3 seconds. Then it exploded. The elderly women began talking all at once, their voices high and excited. The German couple stared at Rafaela like she had just performed a magic trick. The young man with the laptop was typing furiously, probably posting about what he had just witnessed to whatever social media platform would listen. And Signor Bianchi, poor, nervous Signor Bianchi, looked like he might faint. "Rafaela," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What have you done?" It was a good question. What had she done? She had broken 3 years of silence. She had made herself visible to one of the most dangerous men in Palermo. She had chosen dignity over safety, voice over survival. She had, in the span of 2 minutes, dismantled everything she had built to protect herself. And the worst part, the truly terrifying part, was that she didn't regret it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Because here's what Rafaela Moretto understood in that moment. Standing behind the counter of the Café del Serene, with her heart pounding and her hands finally steady. Silence might keep you alive, but it kills you in other ways. Slower ways. Ways that hollow you out from the inside until you're nothing but a shell moving through the world, going through motions, existing but not living. She had been that shell for 3 years, and in 2 minutes, she had cracked it open. What would emerge from that crack, she had no idea. But as she looked around the cafe, at the faces staring at her with something that looked like admiration, at Bianchi's terrified expression, at the money Luciano had left on the counter, far too much money, money that felt less like payment and more like a promise, she realized that she had just done something irreversible. She had made herself matter to a man who could destroy her with a phone call. She had challenged someone who was never challenged. She had spoken truth to power, and power had listened. The question was, what would power do next? If you think standing up to a mafia boss is dangerous, wait until you see what happens when he decides you're worth his attention. So hit that subscribe button because this story is just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Rafaela had spent 3 years running from her past, hiding in plain sight, choosing invisibility over identity. But in one moment of defiance, she had made herself visible to the most dangerous man in Palermo. She had answered his mockery with eloquence, his cruelty with dignity, his power with truth. And Luciano Ferranti, a man who built an empire on fear, had smiled, not with anger, not with threat, but with interest. And in the underworld of Sicily, interest from a man like Luciano Ferranti was more dangerous than his rage could ever be, because rage burns hot and fast. But interest? Interest is patient. Interest takes its time. Interest doesn't forget. As the afternoon sun continued to paint gold across the cafe's tile floors, as the elderly women returned to their card game, and the German couple finally looked back at their map, as life slowly resumed its normal rhythm, Rafaela stood behind the counter and asked herself the question that would haunt her for days to come. Had she just freed herself, or had she just painted a target on her back that no amount of silence could ever erase? And more importantly, when Luciano Ferranti returned, because men like him always returned, would he come as an enemy or as something far more complicated? Because here's the thing about breaking silence. Once you find your voice, you can never quite go back to being voiceless. And here's the thing about challenging power. Sometimes power doesn't crush you. Sometimes it becomes fascinated by you. And fascination, Rafaela was about to learn, could be the most dangerous thing of all. So tell me, if you had spent years hiding, years making yourself invisible to stay safe, and in one moment of pride you made yourself visible to someone who could destroy you, would you regret it? Or would you do exactly what Rafaela did next? The morning after Rafaela Moretto spoke truth to power, she woke up expecting consequences. What she got instead was silence. And somehow that was worse, because silence from a man like Luciano Ferranti wasn't absence. It was anticipation. It was the held breath before the storm, the stillness before the strike, the quiet that makes you check over your shoulder every time you turn a corner. She walked to work that morning through streets that suddenly felt different, as if the city itself had rearranged overnight, as if every shadow held a watcher, every doorway a threat. Was she being paranoid? Probably. Was she being careful? Not careful enough. Because what Rafaela didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her 2-minute act of defiance had set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just her life, but the entire power structure of Palermo's underworld. And it would start with something as simple as a regular customer ordering his usual cappuccino. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Rafaela moved through the Café delle Sirene like a woman waiting for an execution that never came. The other staff treated her differently now, some with admiration, others with the kind of distance you maintain from someone who might be contagious with bad luck. Signor Bianchi watched her constantly, his nervous energy ratcheted up to levels that made his hands shake when he counted the register. "Maybe you should take some time off," he suggested on the 5th day, his voice careful, diplomatic. "A vacation. Visit family, somewhere far from here." But Rafaela had no family to visit. Not somewhere far from here that wasn't already haunted by the past she'd been running from. So she stayed. She served coffee. She cleared tables. She waited. And then, on the 8th day, Luciano Ferranti walked back through the door. It was early afternoon, that dead zone between lunch and dinner, when the cafe was nearly empty, except for a couple of university students studying in the corner and an old man reading a newspaper by the window. Rafaela was wiping down the espresso machine when she felt that familiar shift in air pressure, that subtle change in the room's energy that announced his presence, before her eyes confirmed it. But this time, something was different. He was alone. No entourage. No buffer of armed men creating kingdoms within kingdoms. Just Luciano Ferranti in another perfectly tailored suit, navy blue this time, with a tie the color of dried blood, walking through the door like any other customer. Except he wasn't any other customer, and they both knew it. He chose a table by the window, not his usual corner booth, somewhere visible, exposed even. It was a statement, though Raffaella wasn't sure yet what it was stating. She watched as Bianchi materialized from the back room, his face already arranging itself into that expression of forced welcome, but Luciano waved him off with a casual gesture. Then he looked directly at Raffaella and said loud enough for the whole cafe to hear, "I'd like the waitress who knows how to speak if she's available." Every eye in the cafe turned to her. The university students stopped studying. The old man lowered his newspaper. Even the espresso machine seemed to quiet its hissing, as if the entire world was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Raffaella felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she kept her face neutral, kept her movements steady as she picked up her notepad and walked toward his table. When she reached him, she didn't wait for him to speak first. "Good afternoon, Signor Ferranti. What can I bring you?" Her voice was calm, professional, giving nothing away. He studied her for a moment, and she could see him cataloging details, the way she held herself, the steadiness of her hands, the fact that she met his eyes without flinching. Then he smiled, and it was that same genuine smile from before. The one that was somehow more unsettling than any threat. "A cappuccino, and your company, if you can spare 5 minutes." It wasn't a request, but it also wasn't quite a command. It existed in that gray space between the two, and Raffaella understood that her answer mattered more than she might think. "I'll bring your cappuccino," she said carefully. "As for my company, I'm working." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or respect, or that dangerous combination of both. "Of course, you're working. But humor me, Raffaella." The sound of her name in his mouth made her skin prickle. She hadn't told him her name, which meant he had asked, which meant he had been thinking about her, which meant she was already deeper than she'd realized. "5 minutes, he continued. "I promise I won't mock your Italian. I've learned that lesson." The university students were openly staring now. Bianchi looked like he might have a heart attack, and Raffaella stood there, balanced on the edge of a decision that felt far more significant than it should. She could say no. She could maintain her boundaries, keep her distance, refuse to engage with a man whose world was built on violence and fear, or she could say yes. She could sit down. She could listen to what he had to say. She could step further into whatever this was becoming. Have you ever stood at a crossroads and really known that your next choice would change everything? That's where Raffaella was, and here's what she chose. 5 minutes, she said, "after I bring your cappuccino." She walked back to the counter, her mind racing. Marco was already preparing the drink, his eyes wide with questions he was too smart to ask out loud. While the espresso machine hissed and steamed, Raffaella tried to think through the angles, tried to understand what Luciano Ferranti could possibly want from her. An apology? Unlikely. Revenge? He didn't seem angry. Information? About what? She was nobody, had nothing, knew nothing that could possibly interest a man like him. Unless he had somehow discovered who she really was. Unless he had dug into her past and found the professor, the testimony, the reason she had spent 3 years making herself invisible. But if that were true, if he knew, then why this? Why the public meeting, the polite request, the almost courteous approach? Men like Luciano Ferranti didn't need permission to destroy people. They just did it. So what was this? Marco handed her the cappuccino, and she carried it back to Luciano's table, her mind still spinning through possibilities. None of them comforting. She set the cup in front of him, and he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please." Raffaella glanced at Bianchi, who gave a tiny, helpless nod. What else could he do? And she sat down, perching on the edge of the chair, her posture making it clear this was temporary, that she could leave at any moment. Luciano took a sip of his cappuccino, his eyes never leaving her face. "Perfect," he said. "You make excellent coffee." "Marco makes the coffee. I just carry it." But presentation matters, doesn't it? The way you set the cup down, the care you take. These details tell a story." He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, as if they were old friends catching up. You told me a story last week, Rafaela, about respect, about language, about power. It was a good story, very educational. I've been thinking about it. She said nothing, waiting, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. He continued, I've also been thinking about you, about how a waitress in a neighborhood cafe speaks like a university professor, about how someone who's been working here for 1 month moves through this place like she's trying not to be noticed, about how a woman who clearly has education, intelligence, capability, ends up serving coffee in Palermo's old quarter. These things interest me. Do you know why? Rafaela's throat felt tight. I couldn't begin to guess. Ignore. Because they don't add up. And in my experience, when things don't add up, it's because someone is hiding something. So I asked around. Very discreetly, you understand. I have resources. People who can find information. And do you know what I discovered? Here it comes, Rafaela thought. Here's where everything falls apart. But Luciano's next word surprised her. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Rafaela Moretto appeared in Palermo 3 months ago, rented a small apartment, got a job at this cafe, and before that, nothing. No history, no records, no digital footprint. It's like you didn't exist 3 months ago. Which is fascinating because people don't just appear out of nowhere, not unless they're running from something or hiding from someone. He took another sip of his cappuccino, letting his words settle. So here's what I'm curious about, Rafaela. What is a woman with your intelligence, your education, your obvious capability running from? And more importantly, should I be concerned that whatever you're running from might show up in my city? The question hung in the air between them, and Rafaela felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. This was the moment. She could lie. She could deflect. She could stand up and walk away and hope that would be the end of it, or she could do something incredibly stupid and tell him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I'm not running from someone, she said quietly. I'm running from who I used to be. Luciano's eyebrows raised slightly. And who was that? Someone who believed that truth mattered more than survival. Someone who learned the hard way that she was wrong. She met his eyes, and for the first time since sitting down, she let him see past her careful mask. I testified against people I shouldn't have testified against. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought justice mattered. I was naive, so I disappeared. I became someone else, someone smaller, someone who wouldn't make that mistake again. She paused, then added, until last week, apparently. For a long moment, Luciano said nothing. He simply studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. Do you know what I think, Rafaela? I think you're still that person, the one who believes truth matters. You just buried her for a while, but she's still there. I saw her last week when you stood in front of my table and refused to be small, and I'm seeing her now. He sat back again, his voice returning to normal volume. Which brings me to why I'm here. I have a proposition for you. Rafaela's stomach dropped. I'm not interested in... Not that kind of proposition, he interrupted, and there was something almost like offense in his tone. I'm a businessman, Rafaela, and I have a problem that someone with your particular skills might be able to help me solve. I need a translator, someone who understands not just language, but culture, someone who can navigate conversations with international partners and understand the subtext, the implications, the things that aren't being said, someone intelligent enough to catch details that others miss. My current translator is adequate for basic work, but I'm expanding into new territories, new partnerships, and I need someone exceptional, someone like you. The cafe seemed to tilt slightly. Of all the things Rafaela had expected, threats, warnings, demands, this wasn't even on the list. You want to hire me? I want to offer you an opportunity, better pay than you're making here. More interesting work, a chance to use that brain you've been hiding, and... He paused, his eyes holding hers. My protection. Whatever you're running from, whoever might come looking for the person you used to be, they'd have to go through me first, and very few people are willing to do that. It was a good offer. Too good, which meant there was a catch. There was always a catch. And in return, Rafaela asked, in return, you work for me. You translate, you advise. You help me navigate situations where cultural understanding matters. That's all. That's all, she repeated, not believing it for a second. Nothing else? Luciano smiled. Well, perhaps one other thing. You continue to be exactly who you were last week. The woman who speaks the truth. The woman who doesn't make herself small. I have enough people around me who tell me what I want to hear. I need someone who'll tell me what I need to hear. Can you do that? It was a trap. It had to be a trap. Men like Luciano Ferranti didn't offer opportunities. They offered chains disguised as opportunities. And yet there was something in his eyes, something in the way he spoke, that made Rafaela wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was being sincere. Or at least as sincere as a man in his position could be. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take your time. 24 hours. He stood, pulling out his wallet and leaving money on the table. Again, far too much. But Rafaela, while you're thinking, consider this. You've already made yourself visible. You've already stepped out of the shadows. The question isn't whether you're in danger. You are. The question is whether you face that danger alone or whether you face it with resources, protection, and purpose. Choose wisely. Then he was gone, walking out of the cafe and leaving Rafaela sitting at the table, her mind reeling, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, because he was right. She had made herself visible. Invisibility, once achieved, couldn't be undone. That night, Rafaela lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to think through the angles. Every instinct screamed that working for Luciano Ferranti was a terrible idea. He was a criminal. His empire was built on violence, extortion, and fear. Everything she had stood against in her previous life. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. About being the person who speaks truth. About not making herself small. About having protection against whatever might come looking for her. Because here's what Rafaela hadn't told Luciano. The people she had testified against 3 years ago weren't small-time criminals. They were connected, they had resources, and they had long memories. She had been lucky so far, staying hidden, staying invisible. But luck runs out. It always does. And when it did, what then? Could she really face that alone? Or was Luciano's offer, dangerous as it was, actually her best chance at survival? She didn't sleep that night. She just lay there, turning the question over and over in her mind, until the sun came up and she still didn't have an answer. But she had to give 124 hours. That's what he'd said. So when her shift ended the next day, instead of going home, Rafaela did something that would have terrified the woman she'd been a month ago. She asked Bianchi for Luciano's contact information. His face went pale. Rafaela, please, think about what you're doing. I have thought about it. That's the problem. Bianchi gave her a number, his hands shaking as he wrote it down. Be careful, he whispered. Men like him, they don't let go once they have you. I know, Rafaela said. But what choice did she have? She called the number. A man answered. Not Luciano, someone else. Someone whose voice was flat and professional. She gave her name. There was a pause, then one moment, another pause. Then Luciano's voice, warm and unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting her call. Rafaela, have you made your decision? I have questions first. Of course you do. Meet me tomorrow. 2 o'clock. There's a restaurant on Via Roma, Ristorante Bella Vista. Come alone. We'll talk. The line went dead, and Rafaela stood there in her apartment, phone in hand, wondering if she had just made the smartest decision of her life or signed her own death warrant. Because here's the thing about making deals with dangerous men. You never really know which it is until it's too late. The next afternoon, Rafaela walked into Ristorante Bella Vista wearing the only professional outfit she still owned, a simple black dress and heels that she hadn't worn since her university days. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where tourists took anniversary photos and locals came to impress business partners. Luciano was already there, sitting at a corner table with a view of the street. When he saw her, he stood, an old-fashioned gesture that seemed incongruous coming from a man who made his living through violence. You came, he said. I said I would. People say a lot of things. Following through is rarer. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please, sit. Order whatever you like. We have time. Over the next hour, Raffaella asked her questions, and Luciano answered them with a directness that surprised her. Yes, his business involved illegal activities. No, he wouldn't ask her to participate in anything criminal. Yes, there were risks. No, he couldn't guarantee her complete safety. No one could, but he could make her significantly safer than she was now. And yes, she could walk away at any time. Though he added with that slight smile, I'd prefer you didn't. Why me? Raffaella finally asked. You could hire any translator. Why does it have to be me? Luciano set down his wine glass and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because last week you did something no one else in this city would do. You looked at me, at who I am, what I represent, and you refused to be afraid. Or maybe you were afraid, but you spoke anyway. Do you know how rare that is? Everyone around me is either terrified or trying to use me for something. But you just wanted me to understand that words matter, that people matter, that respect isn't something you can take, it's something you earn. And I realized something in that moment, Raffaella. I realized that I've surrounded myself with people who are very good at violence and very bad at truth. And maybe that's been a mistake. He leaned forward. I'm not a good man. I won't pretend to be. But I'm trying to build something that lasts. Something beyond just fear and force. And for that, I need people who can see clearly, who can tell me when I'm wrong, who can help me navigate a world that's changing faster than I can keep up with. I need someone like you. So yes, I could hire any translator, but I don't want any translator. I want you. The words hung in the air between them, and Raffaella felt something shift in her chest. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was everything she should run from. And yet for the first time in 3 years, someone was asking her to be herself, not the invisible waitress. Not the woman hiding from her past, but the professor, the scholar, the person who believed words mattered and truth mattered and people mattered. Someone was asking her to stop being small. Could she really say no to that? Should she? Before she could answer, Luciano's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed, hardened into something cold and dangerous. I need to take this, he said, standing. Excuse me. He walked toward the restaurant's entrance, phone to his ear, and Raffaella watched as his body language shifted, as the courteous businessman disappeared and something else emerged. Something predatory, something lethal. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand clenched into a fist. Something was wrong. Very wrong. When he returned to the table, his face was carefully neutral, but Raffaella could see the storm behind his eyes. I apologize, he said. Something's come up. Business. I need to handle it. Quinky, is everything all right? The question was out before she could stop it, and Luciano looked at her with something like surprise. Why do you ask? Because you look like you want to kill someone. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Perceptive. Yes, actually I do. But that's not your concern. Not yet anyway. Have you made your decision? Raffaella took a breath. This was it. The moment. The choice. And in that moment she thought about the past 3 years. About being invisible. About being safe. About being slowly erased day by day until she barely recognized herself anymore. And she thought about last week. About speaking up. About feeling alive for the first time in years. About mattering. And she made her choice. Yes, she said, I'll work for you. On one condition. Name it. You meant what you said about wanting someone who tells you the truth. Because if I do this, if I step into your world, I won't lie to you. Not to protect your ego, not to make things easier, not for any reason. If you ask my opinion, you get my honest opinion. Can you handle that? Luciano's smile was genuine now, reaching his eyes. Raffaella, I'm counting on it. Welcome to the organization. You start Monday. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His grip was firm, warm, and somehow felt like both a promise and a warning. Now, he said, his tone shifting back to business, I really do need to go handle this situation. but I'll have someone contact you with details. Where to go, what to expect, how much you'll be paid in the meantime. Finish your meal. It's already paid for. And Rafaela? He paused at the table's edge. Thank you for saying yes. I think we're going to do interesting things together. Arr! Then he was gone, leaving Rafaela sitting alone in an expensive restaurant, wondering what the hell she had just agreed to. But beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, there was something else, something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just the thrill of stepping off a cliff and not knowing yet whether she'd fly or fall. And here's what Rafaela didn't know, couldn't have known, as she sat there finishing her wine. The phone call Luciano had received wasn't just business, it was a warning. Someone had been asking questions about him, about his operations, about his associates, and specifically about a new woman he'd been seen with a waitress. Someone was watching, someone was interested. And in Luciano's world, interest from the wrong people could be fatal. He had just offered Rafaela his protection. But what he hadn't told her, what he couldn't tell her yet, was that she might need it sooner than either of them expected. Because the thing about stepping into the light is that it makes you visible to everyone, not just the people you want to see you, but the people you've been hiding from. And Rafaela's past was about to catch up with her, present in ways that would test everything she thought she knew about survival, loyalty, and the price of finally being seen. So if you're wondering whether Rafaela made the right choice, whether working for a mafia boss could ever be the smart move, whether she just saved herself or condemned herself, well, so was she. And she was about to find out. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will change everything. And you won't believe how a simple translation job becomes a matter of life and death when the wrong people start paying attention. 3 days later, Rafaela walked into her new life, and nothing would ever be the same again. But that's a story for what comes next. For now, all you need to know is this. She had made her choice. She had stepped out of the shadows, and in Palermo's underworld, once you step into the light, there's no going back to darkness. The only question is whether you'll survive what the light reveals. The thing about making deals with dangerous men is that you never really know the full price until the bill comes due. And for Rafaela Moretto, that bill arrived exactly 6 days after she started working for Luciano Ferranti, delivered not with a knock on the door, but with an explosion that shattered the morning calm of Palermo's old quarter and changed everything she thought she understood about survival, loyalty, and the cost of finally being seen. Because sometimes the past doesn't just catch up with you, it runs you down. And when it does, you discover who you really are in the space between the blast and the silence that follows. It was a Tuesday morning, early enough that the sun was still painting the cobblestones gold, late enough that the Café del Sirene had already opened for business. Rafaela wasn't there. She hadn't been back since accepting Luciano's offer. But Signor Bianchi was, and so were the early morning regulars, the ones who came for espresso and cornetti before starting their day, the elderly women who played cards, the young man with his laptop, the German couple who had witnessed Rafaela's moment of defiance and had been coming back every day since, hoping to see her again. They were all there when the bomb went off, not inside the cafe. Whoever planted it had enough restraint or enough calculation to place it in the alley behind the building, where the damage would be significant but not catastrophic. The explosion blew out the back wall, shattered every window, sent tables and chairs flying like toys in a child's tantrum. But it didn't kill anyone. And that, Luciano would later explain to Rafaela, was the point. Because in the language of Palermo's underworld, a bomb that could have killed but didn't was a message. And the message was clear. We know where you've been, we know who matters to you, and we can reach them anytime we want. Rafaela was in Luciano's office when she got the news, sitting across from him at a massive mahogany desk, reviewing documents for a meeting with Portuguese shipping contractors. She had been working for him for less than a week, and already she was discovering that his world was far more complex than she'd imagined. Layers upon layers of legitimate businesses hiding illegitimate ones. International partnerships that required delicate navigation, cultural nuances that could make or break million-euro deals. It was challenging work, interesting work. The kind of work that made her feel like herself again, like the professor she used to be, analyzing and advising and mattering. And then Luciano's phone rang. She watched his face change as he listened, watched the careful control slip for just a moment, revealing something cold and lethal underneath. When he hung up, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The cafe," he said quietly. "Someone bombed it." The world tilted. "What? When? Is anyone—" "Everyone's alive. Injured, some of them, but alive. It was designed that way. This wasn't about killing. It was about sending a message." He stood, walked to the window, his back to her. "To me. Through you." Rafaela felt ice spreading through her chest. "What do you mean through me?" Luciano turned, and now his expression was clear. It was anger, barely contained, simmering just beneath the surface. "Someone knows you used to work there. Someone knows I've hired you. And someone wants me to understand that they can reach the people around me, the people I've chosen to protect. This is a challenge, Rafaela, a very direct, very dangerous challenge." The ice in her chest turned to fire. Bianchi, the staff, the customers, they had nothing to do with this. They're innocent. There's no such thing as innocence in my world. There are only people who are useful and people who are collateral. And right now, because of your connection to me, those people became collateral. His voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry. I knew there were risks, but I didn't expect them to move this quickly." Rafaela stood, her hands clenched into fists. "Who did this?" "I have suspicions, but I need confirmation before I act. In the meantime, you're moving. Today, your apartment isn't safe anymore. I'm putting you in a secure location with security. You don't go anywhere alone. You don't contact anyone from your old life. You follow my instructions exactly, understood?" It wasn't a request, but Rafaela heard herself say, "No." Luciano's eyebrows raised. "No? No, I don't understand. You told me I could walk away anytime. You told me this was just translation work. You told me—" "I told you there were risks," he interrupted, his voice sharp now. "I told you that working for me meant stepping into a dangerous world. You said yes. You made that choice, and now we deal with the consequences." "The consequences?" Rafaela's voice rose. "People I know, people I serve coffee to, people who were kind to me, they're hurt because I made the mistake of being visible, because I stood up to you, because I thought I could stop being invisible without anyone getting hurt. And now you're telling me the solution is to hide again? To let you lock me away in some secure location while you handle this? That's not protection, Luciano. That's a cage." They stared at each other across the desk, and in that moment, Rafaela saw something shift in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "I want to help. I want to fix this. I want—" She stopped, trying to organize her thoughts. "You said this was a message A challenge. So who's challenging you, and why now?" Luciano studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing something, making a calculation. Then he made a decision. "Sit down," he said. "If you're going to be part of this, you need to understand what you're part of." Over the next hour, he told her things that probably should have terrified her. About the rival families who controlled other parts of Palermo. About the internal tensions in his own organization. People who thought he was getting soft, losing his edge. About expansion into new territories that had upset old balances of power. And about the fact that someone inside his organization was feeding information to his enemies. A traitor. Someone close enough to know about Rafaela, about the cafe, about the connections that could be exploited. "I've been trying to identify them for weeks," Luciano said, "but they're careful, smart, and now they've made their move, using you as the weapon. They know that if I can't protect the people around me, I look weak, and weakness in my position is fatal." Rafaela's mind was racing, processing information, making connections. The phone call at the restaurant. When you got that call and your whole demeanor changed. That was about this, wasn't it? Someone warning you? Someone told me that questions were being asked, that interest was being shown. I should have acted faster, should have moved you immediately, but I thought I had more time. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Luciano Ferranti looked almost vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Rafaela. I brought you into this world, and now you're paying the price for my miscalculation." Here's what Raffaella could have done in that moment. She could have blamed him. She could have walked away. She could have demanded he fix this without her involvement. She could have chosen safety over agency, protection over participation. But here's what she did instead. Stop apologizing, she said, and start telling me how we find the traitor. Luciano blinked. We? You said you needed someone who tells you the truth, someone who sees clearly, someone who can catch details others miss. So use me, not as someone to protect, as someone who can help. I spent years studying how people communicate, how they reveal themselves through language, through behavior. Let me look at your organization with fresh eyes. Let me help you find who's doing this. She leaned forward. Because here's what I understand now, Luciano. I'm already in this. The bomb made sure of that. Hiding won't change it. Running won't change it. The only way out is through. So let's go through it together. For a long moment, Luciano said nothing. Then slowly he smiled. That genuine smile that transformed his face from dangerous to almost human. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Raffaella admitted. But I'm also right. You know I'm right. He nodded slowly. All right, we do this together, but we do it my way. You still move to a secure location. You still follow security protocols. But yes, I'll give you access to my organization, to the people, the operations, the information you observe, you analyze, you tell me what you see, and maybe we find our traitor before they make their next move. He extended his hand across the desk. Partners? Raffaella shook it, feeling the weight of what she was agreeing to. Partners. And just like that, the waitress who had spent 3 years being invisible became a hunter in Palermo's underworld, searching for a traitor who had already proven they were willing to hurt innocent people to make a point. The question was, could she find them before they struck again? And more importantly, was she ready for what she might discover when she did? The next 72 hours were a crash course in a world Raffaella had only glimpsed from the outside. Luciano kept his word. She was moved to a secure apartment in a building he owned, with guards stationed discreetly at every entrance. But he also gave her access to meetings, to conversations, to the inner workings of an organization that operated in shadows and spoken codes. She met his lieutenants, his advisors, his enforcers. She watched how they interacted with him, how they spoke when they thought no one important was listening, and she started to see patterns. Tommaso, the lieutenant who had laughed loudest at Luciano's mockery that first day at the cafe. He was loyal to a fault, but not particularly bright. Marco, the financial advisor. Brilliant with numbers, but terrified of violence, unlikely to risk himself in a power play. Julia, the only woman in the inner circle, who managed the legitimate businesses, ambitious, calculating, but her ambitions seemed focused on money, not power. And then there was Dante, Luciano's cousin, his oldest friend, the man who had been with him since the beginning, who had helped build the empire from nothing. Dante was charming, intelligent, well-liked by everyone in the organization. He was also the one person Luciano trusted completely, which was why Raffaella's instincts started screaming the moment she met him. It wasn't anything obvious. It was small things. The way he looked at Luciano when he thought no one was watching, not with loyalty, but with something that looked almost like resentment. The way he asked questions about Raffaella, casual questions that felt like they were probing for information. The way he positioned himself in meetings, always slightly apart, always observing. And most tellingly, the way he spoke. Raffaella had spent years studying linguistics, understanding how people reveal themselves through language. And Dante's language was careful, too careful. He never quite committed to anything, never quite took a position. He was always agreeable, always supportive, but in a way that left him room to pivot, to claim he'd meant something else, to distance himself if things went wrong. It was the language of someone who was preparing for multiple outcomes, someone who was hedging his bets. She couldn't prove anything, not yet. But her instincts, honed by years of reading subtext and analyzing communication patterns, told her that Dante was the key, so she started watching him, carefully, quietly, the way she had learned to watch the world during her 3 years of invisibility. On the 4th day after the bombing, Luciano called a meeting of his inner circle. They gathered in a private room above a restaurant he owned, 6 people sitting around a table, discussing how to respond to the attack on the cafe. Raffaella was there too, sitting slightly apart, ostensibly as a translator, though no translation was needed. She was there to observe, to listen, to see. "We need to send a message on," Tommaso was saying, his voice hard. "Show strength, hit back twice as hard." "Against who?" Julia asked. "We don't even know who did this." "Then we hit everyone," Tommaso replied. "Make it clear that attacking us has consequences." Luciano shook his head. "That's not a strategy. That's tantrum. We don't move until we know who we're moving against." "Then how do we find out?" Marco asked nervously. "We ask questions. We apply pressure. We make people uncomfortable until someone talks." This from Dante, his voice calm, reasonable. "But carefully, we don't want to start a war we're not ready to finish." Everyone nodded. It was good advice. Sensible advice. The kind of advice a loyal lieutenant would give. But Raffaella noticed something. When Dante said, "We don't want to start a war," his eyes flickered to Luciano for just a fraction of a second. And in that flicker, she saw something. Calculation. Assessment. Like he was measuring something. After the meeting, as people were filing out, Raffaella caught Luciano's eye and gave a tiny shake of her head. Not here, not now. He understood. Later in his office, with the door closed and security ensuring no one could overhear, she told him what she'd seen, what she suspected. Luciano's face went very still. "Dante," he said quietly. "You think it's Dante? I think it's worth investigating. I could be wrong. But Luciano, the way he speaks, the way he positions himself, he's preparing for something, and if I'm right, if he is the traitor, then he's the most dangerous kind. Because he's not doing this for money or power. He's doing it because he thinks he should be where you are." Luciano stood, walked to the window, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Dante and I grew up together. We built this together. He's family. I know, and I'm sorry, but you asked me to tell you what I see. That's what I see." For a long moment, Luciano said nothing. Then, "If you're right, if he's betrayed me, then this isn't just about business. This is personal, and personal betrayals require personal responses." Sakshama. There was something in his voice that made Raffaella's skin prickle. "What does that mean?" He turned to face her. "It means we need proof, real proof, and then we need to end this. Permanently." The word hung in the air between them, and Raffaella understood what he was saying, what he was planning. "You're going to kill him. If he's guilty, yes. That's how this world works, Raffaella. Betrayal has one price. You knew that when you agreed to help." She had known intellectually, but hearing it stated so baldly, so matter-of-factly, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "And if I can't live with that?" she asked quietly. Luciano looked at her with something like sadness. "Then you walk away now, before this goes any further. Before you're complicit in things you can't take back, I won't stop you. I won't hold it against you. But you need to decide, Raffaella. Are you in this world, or are you just visiting?" It was the same question she'd been asking herself since the moment she sat down at his table in the cafe, from the moment she agreed to work for him, since the moment she chose visibility over invisibility, and now finally she had to answer it, not with words, but with action. "How do we get proof?" she asked. And with those 5 words, Raffaella Moretto crossed a line she could never uncross. She became not just an observer of Luciano's world, but a participant in it. For better or worse, for survival or destruction. She was in the trap they set, was elegant in its simplicity. Luciano called another meeting, but this time he told each member of his inner circle a different piece of information, a different location where he would supposedly be meeting with the Portuguese contractors, a different time, a different detail. If any of that information leaked to his enemies, they would know exactly who had leaked it. It was a classic technique, one that had been used for centuries to identify traitors, and it worked. 2 days later, Luciano's enemies made their move, showing up at the location that only Dante had been told about, ready to ambush a meeting that was never going to happen because Luciano wasn't there, but his men were. And when the dust settled, when the brief, brutal confrontation was over, Luciano had his proof Dante had betrayed him, his cousin, his oldest friend, the man he had trusted with everything, and now that trust would cost Dante everything. But here's where the story takes a turn that no one expected. Because when Luciano's men brought Dante in, when they sat him down in that same office where Raffaella had first agreed to help, when Luciano stood over him with cold fury in his eyes, Dante didn't deny it. He didn't beg. He didn't make excuses. He simply looked at his cousin and said, "You've gone soft, Luciano. That waitress, this idea that you can build something on respect instead of fear, it's weakness, and weakness gets you killed in our world. I was trying to save you from yourself." The room went silent. Raffaella, standing in the corner, felt her breath catch, because at that moment, she understood something crucial. Dante hadn't betrayed Luciano for power or money. He'd done it because he genuinely believed he was protecting him, protecting the organization, protecting the old ways. He'd bombed the cafe not to hurt Luciano, but to wake him up, to show him that his new approach, his interest in Raffaella, his talk of respect and honor, was making him vulnerable. It was betrayal born not from malice, but from misguided loyalty, which somehow made it worse. Luciano stared at his cousin for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You bombed a cafe full of innocent people to teach me a lesson about strength?" "I made sure no one died," Dante replied. "I'm not a monster. But yes, you need to see that your new way doesn't work, that you can't afford to care about waitresses and civilians and respect not, in our world, not if you want to survive. And the traitor you've been feeding information to, the enemies you've been helping, that was to save me too?" Dante's jaw tightened. That was to create a situation where you'd have to be strong again, where you'd have to remember who you are, who we are. Luciano turned away, his hands clenched into fists. Raffaella could see the war happening inside him, between the man who had built an empire on violence and the man who was trying to become something different, between the old ways and the new, between the person he had been and the person he was trying to be. And in that moment, she made a choice. She stepped forward. "Luciano," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Dante with surprise, the guards with confusion. Luciano with something that might have been hope. What Dante did was wrong, unforgivable. People were hurt, trust was broken, and there have to be consequences. But she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Killing him won't prove you're strong. It'll just prove that Dante was right, that the only language you speak is violence, that you haven't actually changed at all." The room went very still. Raffaella continued, her voice steady. "You told me you wanted to build something that lasts, something beyond fear and force. You told me you needed people who could tell you the truth. So here's the truth. If you kill Dante, you become exactly what he thinks you are. But if you find another way, if you show that strength can look different than it used to, then maybe you prove that your new way can work." Luciano turned to face her, and she couldn't read his expression. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that there are worse punishments than death. Exile, stripping him of everything he has, making him live with what he's done. Showing everyone in your organization that betrayal has consequences, but that those consequences don't always have to be blood." She looked at Dante. He wanted to protect the old ways, so show him that the new ways are stronger, that you're stronger, that you don't need to kill to prove your power. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dante laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're going to take advice from a waitress? This is exactly what I was talking about, Luciano. This is a weakness." But Luciano wasn't looking at Dante anymore. He was looking at Raffaella, and slowly he nodded. "You're right," he said. "Killing you would be easy, Dante. It would be expected. It would be the old way. But Raffaella's right. I'm trying to build something new. So here's what's going to happen. You're out. Out of the organization, out of the family, out of Palermo. You have 24 hours to disappear. If I ever see you again, if you ever come back to this city, if you ever speak my name or interfere with my business, then I will kill you. But until then, you get to live. You get to live with what you've done, with the fact that you betrayed the person who trusted you most. And you get to watch from wherever you end up as I prove that you were wrong, that the new way works. That strength doesn't have to mean violence. He leaned down, his face inches from Dante's. That's your punishment, living with your failure. Now get out of my sight. The guards dragged Dante away, and Raffaella watched him go, wondering if she had just saved a life or made a terrible mistake. When the room was empty, except for her and Luciano, he turned to her. That was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the stupidest. Probably both, she said, echoing her words from days before. But it was the right thing, I think. Luciano smiled, tired but genuine. You know what the interesting thing is? A month ago, if someone had betrayed me like that, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have killed them without a second thought. But you made me hesitate. You made me think. You made me consider that maybe there's another way. He walked to the window, looking out over the city. I don't know if this new way will work, Raffaella. I don't know if you can build an empire on respect instead of fear. But I'm willing to try because of you. Because you showed me that speaking truth to power doesn't have to end in blood. It can end in change. Raffaella joined him at the window. What happens now? Now we rebuild. The cafe. I'm paying for all the repairs, all the medical bills. We make it right, and we move forward. You keep working with me. Keep telling me the truth. Keep helping me navigate this world I'm trying to create. And maybe we prove that Dante was wrong, that there's a different way to be strong. In the weeks that followed, Palermo watched as Luciano Ferranti did something unprecedented. He didn't retaliate with violence. He didn't start a war instead. He rebuilt the Café della Sirene, better than it had been before. He compensated every person who had been hurt. He made it clear that the cafe was under his protection, that anyone who touched it would answer to him. And slowly, carefully, he began to change how his organization operated. Less violence, more strategy. Less fear, more respect. It wasn't easy. There were people in his organization who didn't understand, who thought he was going soft, who grumbled about the old ways being better. But there were also people who saw what he was trying to do and respected it, who understood that maybe, just maybe, there was a different way to have power. And at the center of it all was Raffaella, no longer invisible, no longer hiding, no longer the woman who made herself small to survive. She was visible now. She mattered. She had found her voice and used it to change not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Was it perfect? No. Was it safe? Not even close. But it was real. It was honest. It was a life lived out loud instead of in whispers. 6 months after the bombing, Raffaella stood in the rebuilt Café del Sirene, watching as Signor Bianchi served customers in a space that was both familiar and transformed. The old man saw her and smiled. A real smile, not the nervous one from before. Raffaella, come, let me make you a cappuccino. On the house. She sat at a table by the window, not hiding in the back, not trying to be invisible, just sitting in the sun like any other customer. When Bianchi brought her coffee, he sat down across from her. You know, he said quietly, I was angry at first. About the bombing, about everything that happened. I blamed you. I thought if you had just stayed quiet, stayed invisible, none of it would have happened. He paused. But I was wrong, because what you did, standing up to him, speaking your truth, refusing to be small, it didn't just change your life. It changed all of us. This neighborhood, we're not afraid anymore. We know someone's watching out for us. We know our voices matter. You taught us that, so thank you. Raffaella felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry people got hurt. People always get hurt, Bianchi said. The question is whether they get hurt for nothing or whether they get hurt for something that matters. You made it matter. That's the difference. As Raffaella walked out of the cafe that afternoon, into the golden Palermo sunlight, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from professor to fugitive, from invisible to visible, from silence to voice. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been safe. But it was worth it, because here's what she had learned. You can spend your whole life making yourself small, trying to stay safe, choosing invisibility over identity. But that's not living. That's just surviving. And survival without purpose is just slow death. Real living, real life, requires risk. It requires being seen. It requires using your voice even when it's dangerous, even when it costs you, even when you don't know how the story will end. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, using your voice doesn't just change your story, it changes everyone's story. So here's my question for you. What are you staying silent about? What truth are you not speaking because it feels safer to stay invisible? What part of yourself are you hiding because you're afraid of what might happen if people really saw you? Because Rafaela's story isn't just about a waitress and a mafia boss. It's about all of us, about the choice between silence and voice, between invisibility and presence, between surviving and living. And that choice, that's not something you make once. It's something you make every single day. Now I want you to do something. Don't just watch this video and move on. Take a moment right now and comment below. What's one truth you've been afraid to speak? What's one way you've been making yourself invisible that you're ready to change? Share your story. Use your voice. Because the comment section isn't just for engagement, it's for community. It's for people who understand that being seen is scary but necessary, that speaking up is risky but worth it, that we're all trying to figure out how to live out loud in a world that often rewards silence. So comment, share, tell your truth. And then, and this is important, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because if Rafaela's story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you want to be braver in your own life, then you need to be here for the next story and the one after that. Because we're building something here. A community of people who believe that stories matter, that truth matters, that voice matters, your voice matters. So use it right now in the comments. Tell me, what's your Cafe del Siren moment? When did you choose to be visible instead of invisible? Or when will you? I'm waiting to hear from you. We all are.